Hello folks, Dick Fairburn here. Been talking about fighting rifles for a couple of weeks. I want to wrap up my thoughts on that and ask you a question. Do you think you need a heavy self-defense or fighting rifle? An example being larger than the AR-15 or M4 size, the AR-10 size. If you think you need one of these, or you're just interested, stick around. I'll talk about them. When most of us think about a self-defense carbine nowadays, we think semi-automatic. We think something in the AR-15 or M4 series of rifles. Now, we've talked about a lot of variations of those, other brands. In restricted states, there are things like Mini 14s, SKS rifles, M1 carbines, and even older, M1A variation of the M14, the M1 Garand. Depends on what you think you need. If you already have something like that, then you don't need to go out and buy it. In some states, you can't go out and buy a modern sporting rifle. Massachusetts was the latest to come up with a horrendous weapons ban, just signed last week. Now, like the one here in Illinois, if you have these things already, you're allowed to keep them. They're grandfathered in, so long as you register them with the state. Now, the registration system in Illinois is, the numbers I've seen are very, very low. Perhaps 1 to 2% of the gun owners in the state have registered their evil guns, made evil by the laws in Illinois. I don't know how the registration will go in Massachusetts, too early to call. The 5.56, for all the things that might be held against it, in the modern types of ammunition that are available, it's actually a pretty effective man stopper out to a couple hundred yards or so. Even M193, the original 55 grain full metal jacket bullet, does a pretty good job out to, we'll say, 75 to 100 yards at least, depending on barrel length. The longer the barrel, the longer the reach it has, because there's a threshold velocity of about 2,500 feet per second that was discovered by Dr. Marty Fackler in his testing. And as long as the bullet impacts at or above 2,500 feet per second, it will go in an inch or 2 or 3 inches. It's somewhat variable. And then it will invert, because all bullets that do not expand or fragment will eventually invert and be base forward. Center of gravity is at the base. When that bullet rotates, it breaks in half at the cantilever, at the little crimp groove around the bullet. The front half tends to flatten out and continue intact. The back half tends to blow into fragments. And the wound looks an awful lot like a 55 grain soft point or hollow point load from a 223 or 5.56. Just usually a little bit deeper. And as I said, the full metal jacket is not real consistent. It can do some erratic things, but it's not a bad load at close to perhaps mid-range. If you think you need more wallop for bad human targets, or if you want to use it for hunting, by stepping up to the AR-10 series, we're looking at a whole different level of power. Originally designed for the 308 or the 7.62 by 51 NATO. You can get other calibers in them now. Variations of the 308 can be special ordered from some companies, like 358 for heavier bullets. The 6.5 Creedmoor is very popular round right now. It was designed as a target round. It's, in my opinion, probably not a bad choice for hunting deer-sized game. I have a buddy in Wyoming who has seen the 6.5 used on elk a few times, and he calls it the 6.5 Needmore, because in his opinion you need more power than that rifle cartridge is going to give you against something as big as an elk. That's just his opinion. With the 5.56, if you talk to folks that have been in combat with them, they tended to fire them in strings of 2, 3, 4 rounds, whatever they could get on targets, because it wasn't always 100% stopper with the kind of loads they were using, which was generally M855. The newer M855A1 bullet, which is a multi-part composite bullet, tends to give very good terminal performance from what I've seen in testing. But most of the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan were fought with the old green tip 8.55, and it did not have a really good record for stopping power. So they just hit them 2 or 3 times. Get them with a 7.62, even a full metal jacket, probably one is going to do the job. And if you're using soft point ammunition or hollow point loads, I would find it kind of amazing that a human would take a torso hit with one of those and not stop. You may not kill them instantly, but I think you're going to put them down to some degree, and you're definitely going to take the wind out of their sails. So a whole new level of power. Now that 7.62 by 51 NATO was developed by the United States for the M14. It was eventually adopted by NATO for all of that size semi-auto or full auto weapons that the various countries had. So the FN-FAL, Germany's G3, there were a number of rifles out there for that, and there are civilian variations of those as well. So you don't have to go with an AR platform. You can go with an M1A. You can get semi-auto versions of the FN-FAL or the HK91 or G3 made by other manufacturers. And they all have good points and bad points. What they offer is generally decent accuracy. Some can give you spectacular accuracy, and as I said, a whole lot more power on target. The lightest of these rifles, I do not have one here because in Illinois it's tough to get these things in and out. There is an exemption in Illinois' gun ban law for retired law enforcement, so I can probably get test guns in, but it's going to be a hassle with the manufacturers and the dealers. But the Ruger SFAR, short frame auto rifle, I've handled at police trade shows where Ruger has a booth. It's really not a lot bigger than a 5.56 size AR, and it's really not a lot heavier, maybe a half a pound. It has obviously an AR-10 size magazine well, but just about every other part of it is small. And they use some rather interesting technology to get that done, and I'm told they're pretty reliable and certainly good enough for what we need in accuracy. So if you really want a small light one, then look at the Ruger SFAR. If you want to go the other direction, a company called Noreen Firearms makes a longer than AR-10 action. In bolt action terms, this would be a short action for the 308 size cartridges. Long actions handle 30-06 length cartridges or many of the shorter belted magnums. So Noreen makes a 30-06, and I'm told that on special order you can get 7 Remington Magnums, 300 Win Magnums on this AR platform. I've never handled one, so I can't speak to them, but the option is out there. But sticking with the standard size, there are a lot of manufacturers now. The original was the AR-10 by Armalite, which infers, as you might surmise, that the AR-10 came before the AR-15, and it did. The primary difference was in the carrying handle. It had sort of a large trigger on top, and that's how you operated the bolt. With the AR-15, we got the charging handle. A number of years after the AR-10, and the AR-10 had a kind of a checkered reputation. It was adopted by some small countries, had a pretty decent reputation. The original designer, Eugene Stoner, worked with Knights Manufacturing, and they developed a newer iteration of the original AR-10 size platform, and they called it the SR-25, which I'm told was AR-10 plus AR-15, 10 plus 15 equals 25. And the SR-25 was used in some target competition, and it was adopted by some military groups. You had the familiarization of the same kind of controls, the same kind of training, but the larger caliber. That SR-25 has evolved more and more and more, and the latest iterations of that are becoming in very widespread use in the U.S. military. And it is now called an M110A1. That is a compact semi-automatic sniper system. Or a variation of that with a little bit shorter barrel, a little bit lighter weight, the M110A1 Squad Designated Marksman Rifle. Snipers in the Army and the Marine Corps until a very few years ago generally used bolt action rifles. The Army had a dedicated M24 sniper system. The Marines had the M40. Both of those were based on the Remington 700 bolt action and went through several variations over the course of their life. There were some M14s along the way that had been modified into sniper grade weapons. They were called M21s or XM21s, often with a leatherwood scope that would give some ranging capability in it. But most of the military snipers now are going to this M110 system because they're getting accuracy equivalent to what they got with their bolt guns. They're getting those fast follow-up shots and the ability to have a 20-round magazine in place in case the situation goes bad and they have to kind of fight their way out. So the semi-auto platform has kind of taken over in the military sniping community. Now, of course, the fly in that ointment is just a few months ago the Marine Corps announced that they were doing away with their sniper program. I don't know if that has changed, but you know, the one branch that stayed with sniper training consistently between the wars was the Marines, and now it's questionable if it's going to continue there. So, we're not talking about snipers. However, one big advantage of these ARs is the ability to put optics on and off pretty quickly. This is a Leupold 3.5 to 10. Now, with a couple of different loads, this rifle will shoot under minute of angle groups at 100 yards. And that is the standard for most sniper rifles. So this can give sniper grade performance with a couple of loads. I'm going to be working up my own load because the commercial loads tend to be faster than the M80 ball, and I want to bring them down to a trajectory match. So I want my 150 grain soft point loads, probably a ballistic tip or a Hornady SST, perhaps a Hornady AMAX 155, although I think they might have been discontinued. Sierra makes a 150 or 155 tipped Match King. Those bullets can give you absolute match grade accuracy and tremendous terminal performance. For years, police snipers have used the Federal or other brand name load that uses a 168 open tip match, a Sierra Match King bullet. And that has been the default sniper load for police for quite some time. The problem with it is it gives very, very erratic terminal performance. Sometimes it just punches through like a Full Metal Jacket. Sometimes it will break into 2 or 3 large chunks. But there are people who have been hit with that load that didn't go down right away from body hits. So using a bullet that gives that level of accuracy, matches the trajectory of the M80, and opens up hunting grade or better on enemy targets, I think is the absolute way to go. And I'm going to be working a load up for that this. If you notice, I've just got little yellow marks on here for my range marks for the current load I'm working with. Once that's done, this is a CDS model from Leupold, and you get one custom dial with, when you buy the scope, you can buy more. But once I have standardized that load, then I will send the data to Leupold, and they will give me a range marked dial, so I can dial in the distance exactly for that load. So that's a 3.5 to 10. This is kind of an impromptu sniper rifle. For general purpose use, and I think more for the kind of use you folks would use as a defensive rifle, a low power variable optic is really the way to go. Now, years ago I got sold on Leupold. I have a few other high-end scopes, but I think they represent a great value for the quality for the price you pay, and I am not sponsored by Leupold. These come out of my own pocket. This is a 1 to 6 VX6 in their more military type scopes. They have an LVPO that goes 1.1 to 10, and if you wanted to do any kind of long range stuff with an AR-10, that might be a great scope to get. They're very expensive, but the advantage of more magnification in these scopes is not really to get more precise aiming. It's more of an identification factor. Unless we go to a full-blown civil war or shit hits the fan kind of thing in this country, we're using these kind of rifles for defensive use. If you live in the country, maybe hunting use as well. So 1, 2, at the outside 300 yards for hunting, but for self-defense it's kind of hard to explain yourself if you're shooting more than 100 yards. Now these can be had in a number of various configurations. This is a lightweight. In fact, I bought this a number of years ago. It's a Smith & Wesson M&P 10. At the time, it was the lightest variation of an AR-10 on the market, mostly because of that kind of pencil weight barrel. Some advantages it had, it's actually got an 18-inch barrel instead of a 16, and I think 16 is bare minimum for a 308 or 7.62. A lot of the 5.56 carbines will go down to 14.5, even down as short as 10 and 11. You're giving up a lot of velocity, you're gaining a lot of muzzle blast, but when you go below 16 on one of these, it can really become a beast. So the 18 adds a little velocity, tones down the muzzle blast a little bit. And as I said, until the S-FAR came on the market, I believe this was the lightest variation you could get your hands on. It had several other good features that I like. Nice pop-up sights, a Magpul stock. It's a M-lock, so I added some short sections of Picatinny rail for a light. And Streamlight even sent me a light it's got a large bell on it for rifle use. It has a center hotspot, and at 200 yards, that relatively low lumen light, because of that central focus, will it makes things very easy to identify even at 200 yards a night. So you know, the light capabilities are there. This was done for a policeone.com article when I worked back for them. They like you to try out the accessories of people who buy ads with them and things like that. Battle Comp Corporation, they make muzzle devices started off with the AR-15 size. And I did a review on one of those a number of years ago, and it was very unusual that it not only reduced the muzzle flash to as low or lower than a standard military flash suppressor, it also acts as a compensator, diverts enough gases to actually pull off some recoil. Now, there are a lot of compensators out there that will do that. They bleed off the gases at a non-downrange angle, and about 40% of the recoil of a cartridge is from the uncorking of it and that jet of hot gases that's coming out of there at 15 or 20,000 pounds per square inch, whatever it is at the muzzle. By diverting a lot of that, you can pull 30 to 40% of the recoil off of one of these weapons. But normally those muzzle brakes add greatly to the amount of noise coming out of that weapon. The decibel level climbs very high, especially to people to the side of you. And it was interesting that the Battle Comp didn't. It pulled off recoil, it suppressed the muzzle flash, didn't seem to add a lot to the sound signature. So I contacted them, and they have one now that they call the BABC, the Big Ass Battle Comp, for the .308 size rifles. It's about a ½ inch longer, so it has more area in there, and it significantly reduces the recoil. Muzzle flash is great, reduced down very low, and I and my friends around me don't really see that it's that much louder. So that's a particularly nice, and there again, they don't sponsor me. Magpul, I changed the Magpul grip to the one that has a battery compartment in here, so I can carry spare batteries for both my white light and my illuminated reticles. I had to add some sling studs for the round style quick detached sling mounts. And in any rifle I do precision work with on an AR platform, I do switch out the trigger. I use Geissele triggers, again, not sponsored. The reason I use Geissele is if you talk to the special operations community and the SEALs and Delta boys, and they tend to choose Geissele triggers over everybody else. Some of the triggers reduce the weight by using lighter springs, which means the hammer's not necessarily hitting the primer as hard as a military configuration trigger set. And the primers used in loading for the 7.62 and the 5.56 military loads is a harder primer because of the floating firing pin. If you chamber around in one of these rifles and then pull it out without firing, you're going to see a tiny little dent in the center. That's from that firing pin floating forward and hitting it. So those primers are made less sensitive, tougher primer cups to make sure that that little tiny dent will never set one off. And that means they need to be hit pretty hard. The Geisseles have full power springs in them. They do what they do through angles and engineering rather than reducing springs. There are many other aftermarket triggers on the market that are great. They will give you a 2-stage trigger if you want it. They will give you a better, less creepy single-stage trigger, so research what you want. This is a 2-stage trigger that has a final break of about 2.5 pounds of take-up, and then a 2 pound when you hit the wall, and that allows some very precise shooting. Quick detach mounts. This happens to be a set of Warney rings. This is the LaRue setup. There are a lot of good quick detach that will return to 0, but you need to verify that they will indeed return to 0. So that if you switch between low power variable octave 1 to 6, 3.5 to 10 for more reach, then they can go interchangeable. I just put little paint marks on there for where this one goes. You see little white marks for this one, red mark for that one. I also have a thermal scope. Now a lot of those just look like a box. Mine looks like a traditional scope. It's made by AGM. It's called their Adder series. It's not a super high end, but then any thermal is going to cost you $2 grand or more to get a good one. And the really good ones are going to be a lot more. One advantage of them is they have a number of electronic reticles that you can switch to. So I can switch reticle A1 or set it for this rifle. I can set reticle A2, swap the scope out, put it on my 5.56 carbine. If you wanted to, you could put it on a bolt action sniper rifle as long as you have that Picatinny rail on top, quick detach mounts. I believe it has something like 16 or 18 electronic reticles you can sight for different loads. So I can go general purpose, I can go quasi sniper long range with 3.5 to 10, and when it gets dark, the illuminated optics in these will work great, but even better yet is to pop them off, put that thermal device on there. And if you've used night vision and you've used thermal, I don't think you'll probably ever go back to night vision, because a lot of times you need to add light for night vision, especially if they're back in the shadows from where the moon or the starlight's not reaching them. Thermal, you can't hardly hide from thermal. You are probably going to be warmer than your surrounding conditions, and you're going to glow like crazy. So 3 different capabilities there. Magazines, most manufacturers I think nowadays are using PMags or something like them. This rifle came with some 20 round PMags, and I got more. These are made in 10, 20, and 25 round. The 25 rounds are starting to get kind of big and heavy. And they do have another unique variation. The M110 rifles that the military uses use a specific load called an M118LR. The M118 was always a match grade load. Typically it used a 168 Sierra open tip and was used for match shooting. When the snipers started using that load, they found, as the cops have, that it's not really a great terminal performer, and it's not the absolute best for very long range work. So the M118LR uses a 175 grain Sierra Match King. I believe it has a little bit pointier ogive on it, and it worked great out to really to the limits of what a 308 or 7.62 can work. The difference is the round is a little bit longer than the specifications for 7.62 by 51. So that M118LR will not fit in these standard size magazines. So PMag makes one dedicated to the M118, and that's the one you need to get if you want to use that load. The only downside to them is you kind of got to push them up into the magazine well, and when you hit the button they won't drop free. You have to pull them out. They're just a little bit bigger. They don't bind, they're not difficult to work with, but they will not drop free. So a lot of variations out there depending on what kind of load you're going to do, and all of that depends on what your mission is. If it's self-defense, as I said, it's a little hard to explain how you are defending yourself against someone more than 100 yards away, especially if they got a handgun. Now, if they've got a rifle, I think you can justify out to the reaches of your rifle. And if you live in the country or you want to, multi-purpose this as a hunting rifle, then certainly you want to be able to work out to a longer distance. So by upgrading to the AR-10 size carbines, or as I said, everybody complains, well, what about this? Well, what about that? Yeah, okay. M1A, M1 Garand even, difficult to get optics on. The M1A is fairly easy to get optics on. German G3, or there's another maker now. The FNFAL, there are other makers now. All of those can fire that 7.62 by 51 cartridge and give you the power and the reach that you think you might need beyond the 5.56 carbine. They're heavy, but they hit hard. And it just depends on what you need. In terms of hunting, I would say with the right ammo, this 308 can kill something up to 400, maybe 500 pounds if you choose your shots very carefully and don't go beyond 250 yards. 308 will probably kill a bull elk. I know some guys that have killed elk out in Wyoming with those loads, but they have to kind of pick and choose their shots. You're at the minimum threshold of power for that big an animal, in my opinion. So not a long video today, but I wanted to talk about the big ARs. Do you need a big rifle? If you do, they're available. They're not available in a handful of states. I can't fix that. Hopefully the Supreme Court will fix that. Hopefully no more than a year or two down the road. But time will tell. And a lot will depend on this election coming up in November. if the wrong side gets the White House, and especially if they get both houses of Congress, there's no predicting what they're going to try to do to the Supreme Court. They're going to try to overturn abortion issues, gun control issues, and many others. So, dark days ahead, folks. If you can settle them with what you have on hand in a 5.56 rifle, God bless you. If you need something bigger and you're in a state where you can get it, then maybe you want to look at a big AR. Choose your loads carefully, practice, train as much as you possibly can, and you'll be ready to go. Folks, thanks for watching these videos. I appreciate you doing that. My viewership is up. I'm over 18,000 now. And so, you know, give me a like, give me a subscription if you're willing to do that. I have made a decision just in the last week or two that I am going to run for the NRA Board of Directors. I am convinced that the NRA has turned a corner. They have some reformers on the Board of Directors. They have a new executive vice president that those reformers are comfortable with. And in case you didn't hear the news last week, Wayne LaPierre was banned from being an officer in the NRA for more than 10 years and ordered to repay $4.4 million. The financial guy with him had a similar ban, and he has to pay back $2 million. So I don't think there's any question that there was a great deal of corruption going on inside of the NRA. I think that needs to change. Their board of directors is huge. They have they have 76 members on the board of directors, which I think is probably at least twice as many as they need, because they're flying those people around the country to meetings every so often and costing a lot of money. But the point is, a lot of those board of directors members were kind of hand-selected by Wayne LaPierre. And them not giving proper oversight to what was going on in the NRA is what allowed it to get to the point it did. So I think we need new blood on the board of directors. So I'm going to run for that. I need 400 signatures from voting members. That's a 5-year member or a life or beyond. Life, endowment, patron, benefactor. I am a benefactor member. That's the highest level of giving you can give to the NRA. So I have believed in them for 50 years. I need to get 400 signatures. And the old rule of thumb on things like that is you probably better get at least 50% extra, because when they go to check them, they're going to line out anybody that they think has expired or they can't read their writing or something like that. So if any of you have access to a large number of voting NRA members in a gun club or a shooting match that you go to or something like that, if you'd like to contact me at an email, richardfairburn18@gmail.com. Richard Fairburn. Fairburn is spelled F-A-I-R-B-U-R-N. Richard Fairburn 18@gmail.com. Contact me by email. I'll be glad to send you some blank petition forms if you could get them filled in, self-addressed envelope to get them back to me. There is a deadline of the first week in October, so I would need them back by mid-September at the very, very latest. So if you'd be willing to help me out, get those signatures, try to get on the NRA Board of Directors, drop me an email. And thanks very much for watching, folks. Be safe out there. Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, Bud? Okay, girl, last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah! That's all there is till next time.